a marriage of convenience, a secret that threatens to destroy them, and a spark that changes everything. What would you do if you fell in love with someone who was never supposed to mean anything? Find out. Kang Min-jun, CEO of one of South Korea's most powerful companies, never imagined he would find himself in a modest bar, drinking soju on a Friday night. Accustomed to high-level meetings and lavish dinners, that evening he sought to escape a pressure that not even his power could alleviate, finding a wife before his next birthday or losing his position in the family business. Among the patrons, Min-jun saw her, Yoon Ji-hye, a former high school classmate. He remembered her as a confident and promising young woman, but now he saw her sitting alone at the bar, with a glass of soju and a melancholic expression that reflected the weight of the world on her shoulders. Without thinking too much, Min-jun approached and took a seat beside her. "Ji-hye, do you remember me?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Ji-hye looked up, somewhat surprised to recognize him. She hadn't seen him since high school, but his face was unmistakable. "Min-jun, course I remember," she replied. A faint smile crossed her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. What began as a friendly conversation soon became personal. Both had changed a lot, and life had led them down difficult paths. After exchanging some anecdotes, the conversation grew deeper. "What brings you to a place like this?" Ji-hye asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence that had started to form. Min-jun sighed and leaned over the bar, fiddling with his glass. "It's complicated. My grandfather, the founder of the company, decided that if I don't get married before my next birthday, I'll lose my position as CEO. It's his way of controlling me under the guise of seeking stability." His tone reflected the bitterness and frustration he felt. Ji-hye looked at him with empathy, surprised to hear such a personal confession from someone like him. "Wow, that sounds," she searched for the right word, "quite unfair." Min-jun nodded, grateful for her understanding. "It's not what I expected, but I can't do much about it. And the worst part is that I don't have anyone in mind that I'd like to marry, not even to meet that absurd condition." Ji-hye let out a sigh, sharing her own distress. "I understand more than you think. My boyfriend broke up with me a week ago. My parents were already making plans for our wedding, and now I have to face them and tell them that it's all over. They're going to be devastated, and the worst part is that I have no idea how they're going to take it." Min-jun looked at her, nodding silently, but Ji-hye continued, as if saying it out loud could lift a weight off her shoulders. "My parents have been pressuring me to get married since I turned 25. I thought I had found the right person, which eased the pressure a bit, but now I know they'll insist again. For them, my only mission is to marry and give them grandchildren. With my younger sister engaged, the pressure will only increase." Min-jun could see the tension on Ji-hye's face, and a part of him identified with her situation. Both were trapped by family expectations they had not chosen. "It's funny, isn't it?" he said, breaking the silence. "We both need to get married, though for completely different reasons." Ji-hye fell silent for a moment, processing what he had said. Then the idea began to take shape, though it seemed absurd. "Yes, it's funny," she murmured to herself. Their gazes met, and Min-jun saw in Ji-hye's eyes the same crazy idea that was starting to form in his mind. "Wait, are you thinking the same thing I am?" Ji-hye asked, almost laughing at the madness of the situation. Min-jun offered a smile, the first since the conversation began. "Perhaps," he paused, evaluating the possibility. "We know each other well enough, even though we haven't been in contact for years. And if we both need to get married, we could do it together," Ji-hye completed, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Both knew what they were suggesting was madness, but they also knew it could be the perfect solution to their problems. "It wouldn't have to be real," Min-jun said seriously. "Just an agreement. We get married, solve our problems, and after a while we can continue with our lives." Ji-hye looked at him, remembering how Min-jun had been one of the most popular boys in high school. In fact, they had never had much interaction, and her remembering his name had been quite a surprise. She looked for a sign of doubt in him but found none. What she saw was the same determination she had always admired in him, now accompanied by an offer that could save her from facing her parents. Finally, she made a decision. Agreed, Min-jun. Let's do it. The morning after the meeting at the bar, Min-jun and Ji-hye met in his office to formalize their agreement. Min-jun presented a detailed contract, and after reading it carefully, Ji-hye signed it, aware that this was the best option for both of them. The wedding was discreet with few guests. Ji-hye wore a simple yet beautiful dress, while Min-jun looked impeccable. Although the ceremony was brief, they both experienced mixed emotions. Ji-hye felt the sadness of knowing this wasn't the marriage she had dreamed of, while Min-jun, as he placed the ring on her finger, felt an unexpected chill. During the photos, they exchanged a glance that hinted at a deeper connection than they had anticipated. The reception was formal and swift, with their families happy and the two keeping up appearances. However, when they were finally alone in the hotel room, the tension was palpable. Although they knew their relationship was an arrangement, they both lay in silence, aware that they had taken an important step. The day after the wedding, Min-jun and Ji-hye officially moved into Min-jun's luxurious penthouse, a spacious and modernly decorated space in the heart of Seoul. From the beginning, they agreed that, although they would be living under the same roof, they would maintain a prudent distance. Therefore, they chose to have separate bedrooms, something they deemed necessary to preserve the purely practical nature of their marriage. However, sharing such an intimate space, even with clear boundaries, proved to be more challenging than they had imagined. Every morning, they would cross paths in the kitchen, a little before both left for work. Ji-hye, an architect at a prestigious design firm, was accustomed to having her own routine, just as Min-jun, whose schedule as CEO was as demanding as it was predictable. Still, there was something different about living together, a slight brush of hands as one passed by the other, or the way their glances met briefly but with more intensity than they intended. As the weeks passed, although Min-jun and Ji-hye continued to maintain some physical distance, they gradually began to open up emotionally. Both remained busy with their jobs, but each night, upon returning to the apartment, they felt increasingly comfortable and close to one another. One evening, after a long day at the office, Min-jun arrived at the apartment and found Ji-hye sitting in the living room, reviewing some blueprints. She looked tired, but there was a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "How was your day?" Min-jun asked, letting himself settle into the couch in front of her. "Pretty good, actually," Ji-hye replied, not looking up from the documents. "I'm finishing the last details of an important project, and if all goes well, it will be a significant achievement for the firm." Min-jun nodded, impressed by her dedication. "That sounds great. Is it the inauguration you've been working on?" Ji-hye looked up and nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. "Yes. Actually, I was thinking..." Ji-hye hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to continue. "I was wondering if you'd like to accompany me to the inauguration." Min-jun looked at her, surprised, and for a moment their eyes met, making the tension between them palpable. He accepted, of course, with a warm feeling fluttering in his chest. He liked the idea of accompanying her on a special day as her husband. Would she also notice the electricity running through her body when they were close? On the day of the inauguration, Min-jun arrived at the event and saw Ji-hye in her element. She was surrounded by colleagues, confidently discussing the project she had led, and he couldn't help but feel proud of her. When Ji-hye saw him, her smile widened and she introduced him to her team. "He is my husband, Kang Min-jun," Ji-hye said, feeling a strange mix of pride and nervousness as she did so. Min-jun greeted everyone, feeling more at ease than he had expected. Throughout the event, the tension between them continued to build. Every time they got close, the attraction grew stronger, as if it were waiting for the right moment to overflow. Later that night, when they returned to the apartment, both were exhausted but satisfied. Ji-hye dropped her bag on the sofa and headed towards her room, but Min-jun stopped her. "Ji-hye," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned to look at him, and for a moment the space between them felt too small. "Yes," she responded, noticing the intensity in his gaze. Min-jun took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The silence was thick, laden with unspoken emotions. But before he could say anything more, Ji-hye slightly pulled away, offering a nervous smile. "Thank you for accompanying me today," she said quickly, then retreated to her room, softly closing the door behind her. Min-jun remained in the hallway, feeling the weight of the unspoken and the tension between. The days following the inauguration of Ji-hye's project were marked by increasing tension between her and Min-jun. Although both tried to maintain distance, it was evident that something was changing. The glances they shared lingered longer, and the physical proximity they had previously ignored was becoming harder to bear. One morning, while having breakfast together, Min-jun mentioned an upcoming business trip. "I have to go to Busan next week," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "It's an important trip, and I think you should accompany me." Ji-hye looked up, surprised. "Why?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. "To maintain appearances," Min-jun replied. "We are a married couple, and it wouldn't make sense for you not to be with me at such an important event." Ji-hye nodded, accepting the logic of the situation, although she couldn't ignore the feeling that this trip might complicate things between them even further. "All right, I'll go with you," she said, trying to sound natural. The trip to Busan was uneventful, but the tension between them grew as they spent more time together. Min-jun remained professional during meetings, but whenever they were alone, the atmosphere became denser, laden with emotions neither of them knew how to handle. On the first night, after dinner with the company's partners, they returned to the hotel suite. As was customary on their trips, there was only one bed in the room, and although they had shared a bed before, that night felt different. Ji-hye went to the bathroom to change, and when she came out, she found Min-jun already on the bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. She joined him in silence, feeling the bed grow smaller as the tension between them increased. "Are you okay?" Min-jun asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "Yes, just tired," Ji-hye replied, though she knew that wasn't the only thing keeping her awake. Min-jun turned to look at her, his expression difficult to decipher in the dim light. "We don't have to pretend, Ji-hye," he said, almost in a whisper. "We both know something is happening between us." Ji-hye looked at him, and in that moment she knew they couldn't continue ignoring their feelings. The barriers they had built were crumbling, and no matter how much they tried to rationalize it, the desire that had been growing between them could no longer be denied. "Min-jun," she began, but before she could say anything else, he leaned toward her, capturing her lips in a soft kiss that quickly deepened. Contact was like a spark igniting everything they had repressed. Kiss, timid at first, became urgent and passionate. Min-jun drew her closer, deepening the kiss as his hands explored her back and hips, reflecting the desire accumulated over weeks. Ji-hye responded by entwining her fingers in Min-jun's hair, pulling herself closer to him. They both moved on the bed, eliminating the distance between them as they shed their garments. The skin-to-skin contact intensified their connection. Min-jun lowered his lips to Ji-hye's neck, and she responded with a sigh, allowing the urgency between them to grow. They looked into each other's eyes, aware that there was no turning back. When they finally came together, all their repressed emotions were unleashed in a burst of passion, moving in unison to an increasingly intense rhythm. Upon reaching climax, both trembled and then relaxed into an intimate embrace. Minutes later, they lay together, breathing heavily but peacefully. They knew that what had happened had changed everything, though they had no regrets about what they had shared. The trip to Busan left a deep mark on Min-jun and Ji-hye. Back in Seoul, both tried to resume their lives, but the reality of what had happened between them continued to resonate. The night they spent together changed the dynamics of their relationship in ways neither of them had expected, and now uncertainty surrounded them. At the office, Min-jun tried to concentrate on his work, but his mind kept returning to Ji-hye. What did what happened between them mean? Could they really continue with their agreement as if nothing had changed? He knew he couldn't, but the answers were not straightforward, and he found it difficult to bring up the topic with Ji-hye. Fear paralyzed him. Ji-hye, for her part, felt increasingly confused. Every time she was near Min-jun, she felt the weight of what they had shared in Busan, but also the fear that, to him, it had all been just a moment of weakness. The idea that her feelings might not be reciprocated terrified her, but she didn't know how to talk about it. Days later, while Min-jun was reviewing documents in his office, he received an urgent call from his assistant. "Mr. Kang, there's a problem. The contract you signed with Miss Yoon has been leaked," the assistant said, her voice tense. Min-jun felt the world stop. The contract detailing his marriage of convenience with Ji-hye was now in the hands of the press, and his grandfather had already been informed. "How did this happen?" Min-jun asked, trying to stay calm as anger and fear grew inside him. "We're not sure, but the news is already spreading and your grandfather knows," the assistant replied. Min-jun knew he had to act quickly. Shortly after, he was called to his grandfather's residence. Upon entering the office, he felt the tension in the air. His grandfather looked at him with a severe expression. "Min-jun, is what they're saying true? Was this marriage just an arrangement to maintain your position?" his grandfather asked, not hiding his displeasure. Min-jun, aware that lying made no sense, responded honestly. "At first, yes. It was an agreement to meet the condition you imposed. But things have changed." His grandfather looked at him in disbelief. "What do you mean by changed?" Min-jun took a breath and confessed. "I fell in love with Ji-hye. What started as an arrangement has become something real for me. I can't imagine my life without her." His grandfather watched him in silence, processing his words. Finally, he spoke again. "And what does she think? Does she feel the same way about you?" he asked in a softer tone, but still skeptical. Min-jun remained silent, aware that he didn't know the answer for sure. Finally, he said firmly, "That's something I need to find out." His grandfather nodded slowly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Min-jun," he finally said in a less harsh tone. "It won't be easy to quell this scandal, but I trust you'll be able to handle it." Min-jun trusted that he could. Meanwhile, Ji-hye was in her office when messages and calls from acquaintances began to arrive. Soon, she realized that something was terribly wrong. Opening her email, she found a series of articles discussing her marriage to Min-jun and how it had all started as a convenience arrangement. Fear and shame washed over her. Calls from journalists began to pour in, and at work, murmurs became evident. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and the idea that all of this was affecting her career filled her with panic. That night, when she arrived at the apartment, she avoided looking Min-jun in the eyes. She knew he must be dealing with the same thing, but the pain of being exposed kept her distant. "Ji-hye," Min-jun began, his tone full of concern, but she interrupted him. "I don't want to talk about it right now," she replied, her voice trembling. "I need time." Min-jun nodded, respecting her wish, but he knew that time was not on their side. He would not give up. That night, Ji-hye and Min-jun sank into their thoughts. Ji-hye, alone in her room, felt overwhelmed by the scandals surrounding their marriage after the contract was leaked. She felt exposed and vulnerable, even though she knew Min-jun wasn't to blame. For his part, Min-jun was anguished at the thought that Ji-hye was suffering because of something that had started as a simple agreement but had become something much more real. Unable to bear the distance between them, Min-jun got out of bed and headed to Ji-hye's room. He paused in front of the door, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. "Ji-hye, can I come in?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. After a brief silence, Ji-hye opened the door, revealing her face with slightly reddened eyes. Min-jun, this is a chaos, Ji-hye began, her voice shaky. I don't know how to handle the exposure with everyone talking about us. How can we move forward with so much against us? Min-jun, feeling Ji-hye's pain, approached and took her hands. Ji-hye, he said, his voice trembling. I know this is difficult, but I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. It's not just an agreement. What we've experienced together has changed my life. I can't imagine my life without you now. Ji-hye looked at him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. I don't doubt your feelings, Ji-hye replied, the pain visible on her face. But this whole situation has left me exposed and vulnerable. I'm afraid it will destroy us. Min-jun took a breath, aware that there was no easy solution. I can't promise you that there won't be challenges, he said firmly. But I can promise you that I won't let you face them alone. I love you, Ji-hye, and I'm willing to fight for us, for this love, no matter what happens. Ji-hye, filled with fear, murmured, I'm so scared, Min-jun. Before she could continue, he gently interrupted her. I'm scared too, Min-jun admitted. But I know what we have is worth it. I don't want fear to paralyze us. Give me the chance to prove to you that what we have is real. Tears began to stream down Ji-hye's face, but this time there was a spark of hope in her eyes. Min-jun, she said, her voice trembling but determined. I want to try. I want to really try with you. Min-jun, relieved, enveloped her in a strong embrace. You won't regret it, he murmured against her hair. I will do everything possible to make this work. Ji-hye nodded, looking into his eyes. We will do it together, she replied, feeling for the first time in days that what they had was worth protecting. Epilogue. A year had passed since Min-jun and Ji-hye decided to fight for their love, leaving behind the marriage of convenience that once bound them. Now they shared a life filled with peace and happiness. The spring sun illuminated their apartment, filling the living room with a warm golden light. Ji-hye in the kitchen gently caressed her belly, prominent from her pregnancy, reflecting the tranquility she felt. Min-jun appeared from the bedroom with a smile upon seeing her, approached and embraced her from behind, softly resting his chin on her shoulder. Good morning, Mom, he murmured affectionately, leaving a kiss on her neck. Ji-hye smiled, her heart warmed by those words. Good morning, Dad, she replied, slightly turning her head to look at him, her eyes shining with happiness. How are you feeling today? Min-jun asked, gently stroking her belly with one hand. Good, although our little one seems to be practicing for the Olympics, Ji-hye said with a soft laugh. Min-jun laughed as well, excited by the idea that they would soon become parents. Although the pregnancy had been a surprise, it was a blessing they were both more than ready to welcome. I can't wait to meet him, Min-jun said, his voice full of emotion and tenderness. Although I admit I'm a bit nervous. Ji-hye turned to face him, placing her hands over his. You'll do great, Min-jun. You'll be an incredible father, she assured him. Min-jun looked at her with adoration, grateful for Ji-hye's confidence. He knew the journey had been long and difficult, but now he felt certain that they were exactly where they were meant to be. And you will be an incredible mother, he said, leaning in to kiss her gently. Kiss was slow and filled with silent promises. Ji-hye responded, feeling everything else fade away, leaving only the deep connection between them. As they parted, Min-jun gently knelt, placing his hands on Ji-hye's belly and resting his head against hers. Hello, little one, he whispered tenderly. Your mom and I are so excited to meet you. We already love you more than you can imagine. Ji-hye felt tears of happiness welling up, knowing this was the perfect ending to their story. Min-jun stood up and took her hand, guiding her to the table to share breakfast. That simple gesture symbolized the life they had built together. They were about to become a family, and although the road ahead would bring new challenges, they knew they would face them together, certain that their now unbreakable love would always guide. Do you believe that a marriage of convenience can turn into true love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for more exciting content. Your support helps us keep creating. Thank you for choosing us.